Hello, I'm happy to say again, this is a new books video. Unfortunately, I have the pile reversed. Wait a second, I should turn it around. Okay, first off, is Tom Holt May Contain Traces of Magic. This came out in 2009, and by now, I must say I'm rather well acquainted to the way Tom Holt writes. And I love the fact that every time, everything is extremely mundane and easy to understand until the supernatural element is introduced. In this case, we're following the adventures of one Chris Popham, who's a salesman. The only difference with your regular salesman is that he sells products from JWW, and those are magic products. He's not particularly good at his job and doesn't particularly love it until something crazy happens. Demons are extremely cruel creatures, and they actually feed on desperation and sadness in human beings, start targeting him. And although there's a very special force that's assigned to deal with them, he seems to be the only human they're really interested in, and this is kind of scary. As usual, the prose is extremely funny and quirky and witty, but to be honest, differently than the other books from him I've read. Sometimes in this book I found myself wondering what the heck was going on, and the plot revolves on itself so much it's rather hard at times to establish an empathic relationship with characters because there's so many of them. This is probably the main reason why you can't feel attached to any of them. I've been suggested this book 1,000 times. It's Someday This Pain Will Be Useful to You. It came out in 2007, won the Best Young Adults in 2008. If I have to be honest, I'm a bit sick and tired of the young adults label. But still, it's the story of one James Beck, and he's an outsider. He is a young man who isn't interested in what 18-year-olds normally like. He doesn't appreciate people his own age, and at times he has difficulties liking people of his own blood, except his grandmother, who's eccentric and supportive of him. He is a very pensive character, and I guess in order to achieve the best result in thinking about people and things and places, he thinks the best way is to keep detached, to put some distance between him and the object of his observation. And at times, this is smart and witty. It's a story about growing up and becoming your own person and finding out who you are. But then, especially the long monologues can be a bit tiresome. And in front of a story like this, I think there's two different approaches. One, you enjoy, again, this pensive character looking out of the window and trying to fathom what he is and what life is, what people are, etc., and what he likes, what he doesn't like. Alternatively, though, it may come through as a bit self-conscious and pretentious, self-absorbed. Is there a plot? Yes, but it's rather vague. And because of this vague plot, the ending results a bit abrupt and ephemeral. Well, probably it feels inconclusive, really. And one may say that the story is just a portion of larger stories that the reader can make up and can imagine, and that is true. But this ending, still, it's rather rushed. I chose this book because of the title. You normally hear me say it's because of the cover, and the cover did help, but it was the title that drew me in. This is because The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. Gray is one of my names, and Ptolemy, as I was writing my last story, this obnoxious little thing that I love so dearly was baptized Ptolemy. Everything in this house has a name, not just human beings, and this is Ptolemy. So I thought this book, the title of this book was a sign, and it is a beautiful book, but it is heartbreaking. It is going to break your heart. It's the story, guess what, of one Ptolemy Gray. He's 91 years old and lives alone in a filthy apartment suffering with dementia. His nephew, Reggie's the only one who sometimes goes there and visits, but at some point Reggie's dies, and Ptolemy finds himself meeting this young girl called Robin who will transform his life. This is the beginning of the story in a nutshell, but the point of the whole book, I think, is this love and sense of care among generations, across generations really. The overwhelming frustration of feeling trapped in a body that is failing you is so vivid, it's unbelievably sad. The writing is excellent, and the main idea, I think, again, a second main idea, I guess, is this sort of heritage that you have to pass along to the next generation of what you are and what you've done, what life has taught you. And you have to do so before life actually erases itself from your memory. It's unfathomable, but I guess on the doors of death, my first thought would be to look back at my life and think I want some more. And with this book, it's the same. It's the story of a life, and when the book ends, you find yourself wanting for more. Next is The Passages of Herman Melville. It came out in 2010, and it's a biographical fiction, guess what, about Herman Melville. The book explores his heart and his soul and his way of imagining things. And the narrative is split between Herman and his wife Lizzie. And I think Lizzie is well, not the main character, but the one that stays with you the most. Because hers is a life of quiet servitude. She's forsaken her life in the name of someone else's art. They explore different point of views about their marriage and struggles and memories. And although some of the themes in this book are extremely easy to understand because we're facing them still to this day, like sexual ambiguity and, again, trouble in marriages. What is really different is seeing people move in a world that was still largely unexplored. And the idea must have been ravishing. The fact that there were so many grey areas of the planet where so much could have been going on, it must have been dazzling. Anyway, after this book, you'll find yourself looking at maps differently. And it will also teach you what life must have been like on a ship. And since I'm very easily seasick, it's probably something that I'll never be able to experience on my own. So I'm very grateful to this book because it showed it to me. Amazon suggested this one to me. It says a must for fans of the Hunger Games. Okay, I'm there. It's a young adult fiction set in a dystopian future. Why? Why? Anyway, I won't stop and think of this now. The main character is Thomas. We meet him as he arrives in the Glade. He remembers nothing of how he arrived there, of his family, of his life beforehand. The problem is Thomas, as many other boys, is part of an experiment, and not much of the experiment is known, actually. Things change and shift with Thomas's arrival, especially in the group of kids, of boys who are there, and they start exploring the maze. Now, the story has a very quick pace, and it's pleasant. I mean, at times it's sinister and scary, and it manages to be pleasant nonetheless. I mean, sometimes it's nice to be scared. And the maze is a nice setting. The problem, I think, is that characters development, the interaction of the characters, and the development of the story, all in all, comes through as rather predictable. I was never truly surprised. It may be great for someone who hasn't read much of the same genre yet, but to me, some parts, I'm sorry to say, resulted predigested. Next, again, so many suggested this to me, is The Help. I've just seen the movie too, after finishing the book. It's one of those that has you laughing out loud at one point and crying your eyes out the next. The story is told by three characters. It's set in Jackson, Mississippi in the early 60s, in the time of rights movements roaring and rising. Suddenly, one visionary decides to make a difference in this world that's so thoroughly divided between white and black people, and starts a project with the aid of the local mates. Now, the characters are delightful, and the villain is so evil, it's unbelievable. And all in all, this story is moving and compelling. The female relationships that are explored in this book are extremely emotional, because it goes beyond the color of the skin, of course, and it focuses on women's hopes and dreams and day-to-day struggles. Effectively, in a book that is about whether black or white truly matters, every character is a carefully blended shade of, well, not grey, mocha. So it's believable. All except one. The villain is so, as I said before, is so unbelievably obnoxious, and it's never told why she is so. So this is the only one major flaw, in my humble opinion. This Cruella de Vil has no excuses, no reasoning behind it. And it carries along the one flaw that I found in the book and the movie alike. The point is, this story has been written today in an America with a black man at the White House, and suddenly looks back and realizes how stupid it has been. But this book, differently than The Secret Life of Bees, which is obviously the first reference that came to mind, doesn't stop and think why it was being so stupid. And since realizing why, in my personal opinion, is the first way to avoid making the same mistake twice, I don't know why they're just saying they're sorry so loud instead of understanding what got them there. Talking about dystopian futures, now this is the nobler part of this bunch. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Pulitzer Prize. Won it in 2007, came out in 2006, and there's a movie out, I haven't seen it yet. Anyway, it's set in a post-apocalyptic Earth where a father and son travel and fight to survive in a land that is horribly scarred and violent, and the things they see and fly from are horrific. I mean, we're talking about cannibalism, cold and hunger are just the basic elements of this life. But the book is emotionally shattering, and it's so aggressive. To achieve this effect, the prose is extremely scarce, and it is a bullseye for me because it's desertic, just like the setting. Chabon has called this not a sci-fi, it's a lyrical epic of horror. And I can do nothing else but agree with him, because it is an odyssey that talks about the love between a father and a son, about the environment, and most of all, of the feeling you have towards the things you have lost. I was asked my opinion on The Host, and upon starting to read this, I realized I had already started it once and left it behind. And I'm sorry to say, I should have stopped. I did read the Twilight Saga, and to some extent, it was enjoyable. The writing, in my personal opinion, is not great. The story is not great, especially Breaking Dawn. As I normally say, whatever brings many people to read is a good thing, all in all. The Host is so unbelievably boring. It's one of those books you finish like a chore, and then you think, why did I waste so many hours, and why did they waste so much paper into this? I don't know why. Well, yes, I know why. It is a bestseller, but I'm not sure it should be. Maybe by half of the book, the pace speeds up, but it just doesn't pay you back of the first half that's so unbelievably boring. Also, whenever you mix romance and sci-fi, you have to be extremely careful because you risk ending up in the middle where it's not sure what you are. And this is where The Host is to me. Like, think of Never Let Me Go. That is truly a sci-fi romance. It makes sense and the emotions make sense. With Stephanie Meyer, I sometimes find myself reading a sentence, trusting in the pact of disbelief, and then it gets shattered and I stop and say, why did you do this again? Really, it's just not for me. I also read this supposedly was her first adult fiction, and I find this surprising. Also, about sci-fi romance, I'm not discussing this book now, but I think I should mention it. zero 0.4 by Mike Lancaster, a young adult sci-fi romance. Maybe there's not much romance, but it's fine. It's funny, the idea is great, the twist by the end. So if you ever find yourself debating whether to read The Host or zero 0.4, please go for Mike Lancaster, because trust me, he is a much better narrator. You know, when a book is preceded by its fame, this is what happened to me with The Madness of a Seduced Woman. It came out in 1984. It's another book whose prose shines. At some point, you may find yourself, I know I did, stopping for a moment and reading a sentence twice because it just sounded so fine. You didn't bother understanding what it was saying. She writes like a poet. And although both the characters and the plot at times may not be all that convincing, the manner of the writing, as I said, takes over. The good thing to me is that it's one of those stories where you find yourself sympathizing for characters despite the actions they undertake. And it's fascinating, this idea of the all-consuming love. But, because yes, there's a but, I'm picky, what can I say? Love here, to me, is just an excuse. I mean, I think we're starting with a character who's slightly crazy from the word jump. The means to a craziness end. Should have talked about this right after the road. This is Child 44, first part of a trilogy. The second is called The Secret Speech and the third Agent 6. It came out in 2008 and we follow the misadventures of one Leo Demidov in Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. This book is terrible in a very good way. I know this sounds like a dichotomy, but it's true. The point is that it's based on the crimes of serial killer Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. Women and children were his victims, and the descriptions of murders are horrific. Not because the details are horrific or because you get pulp sequences, none at all. Everything in here is covered in snow and ice. It's hard, it's difficult to survive. You have to time your excursions, you have to be very careful if you get too cold. And exactly like a scenario like this, you know when you hit something with your hands extremely cold and it hurts a lot more than the actual bump? It's the same thing. The descriptions of the murders are not gruesome for the sake of it. It's just what happens that is so terrible it just sifts through. Obviously, the problem comes when stuff like this happens in a society where there is no crime. Also, I think you'll be as excited as I am to know that Ridley Scott is about to turn this into a movie. For once, I find this to be good news. Okay, I'll just talk extremely briefly about this. This is the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English. It's by Penguin, and it's an edition that personally I found satisfying. Now, wherever you stand, whether you think someone listens or not, this is probably the most precious archaeological finding of our time. It's not a light read, and it's not the sort of book that you read from top to bottom, of course, and probably not on the seaside, but it's too interesting not to peek at these scrolls that have traveled so far. Again, whatever you think about them, I think this is something everyone should read. I've also been asked my opinion on Jonathan Strange and Miss Norrell. First off, this is a debut, and there's a very interesting backstory of this book. Apparently, Susanna Clarke was attending this creative writing class. She had to write an essay for it, and her teacher was so impressed he got it to his friend, Neil Gaiman, who was rather impressed too, and I'm not envious at all. I'm a better human being than this. I did enjoy Jonathan Strange. I haven't reread it to talk about it, but still, it's an alternative history of 19th century England. And the idea is that magic once existed in England and has now returned with two men, Gilbert Norris and Jonathan Strange. I think the main point of this book is Englishness. You have this continuous clash of reason and unreason, of madness, the cultural stereotypes, the vigorous common sense, and the fairy tradition. It also collects from literary traditions such as Romanticism, Comedy of Manners, Gothic tale, and of course the Byronic hero. And the two characters, if put side to side, can be said to be a study in contrasts. One element that makes Jonathan Strange stand aside from all the other books of, well, his class, is the language. The idea for the language was to put together a pastiche of 19th century styles. So imagine Jane Austen going out for a date with Charles Dickens, and let's just see what they talk like. The supernatural is described in a very mundane manner, and there are so many details, 200 and probably more footnotes cannot hold them. So, as interesting as the backstory of the book was, the backstory in the book is rather interesting too. I may have issues with the whole plot, especially if you see a book as a journey that has to start somewhere and finish somewhere else. But if you see the journey as just an excuse to visit amazing places and to see beautiful scenery, then this is going to be an enjoyable ride. Talking about Dickensian references, this is the Hotel New Hampshire. Dickensian as in let's get all the lonely people and get them together somewhere. It's the story of the Berries, a family of mother, father, and 5 children. John, the second of the children, is the narrator of the whole story. The point of this family is that there's a lot of love. Some of this love is healthy and some not quite so. But the point is distributing love. And what I think is brilliant is that, when you're a child, you just assume the way your family is and your house is, it's just normal. Anyone's family must be like that. And then at some point you grow up and you realize, no, maybe it's just you. As for the Berries, it's them who are strange. It's tragic and funny. It's such a pleasure to read. Okay, strangely enough, there's just 2 e-books for this selection. One of them is Going Out by Scarlett Thomas. I began reading it thinking it was the new Scarlett Thomas novel. Turns out, no, it came out in 2002. And it's extremely different from the other books I've read of hers. The first I did read was Popco, which is the one right after this. Something must have changed rather abruptly before Popco. Because what is the one flaw that everyone finds in Scarlett Thomas's writings? The endings. Now this one actually has one, and it is a good ending. It also has something of Douglas Coupland in it, I think, because as always you start from the inside and you go outward. So you have these characters and their problems, their issues, and then they reach out to the world. In this case, it's studied, it's geometrical. You have one, who's Luke. He can't go outside because he's allergic to UV rays. And then you have Julie, who's his best friend, is so utterly scared of the world, she'd much rather never go out. So this book is the story of a journey of these 2 people and their friends reaching out and finding their place in the world. And again, what is surprising is the very good ending, the twist that gets you there. Maybe the beginning is slightly slow and repetitive because their lives are slow and repetitive, so it does make sense. Probably not the best of the lot because the prose isn't yet as refined as we've come to know it, especially, in Mr. Y and Bright Young Things, probably. But still, it's a pleasure. The last book that I'm going to talk to you about is John Dies at the End. If you think the title is a spoiler, you have no idea what this book has in store for you. This book is not only a crazy story, it has had a crazy story. It first came out published online as a web serial in 2001. Then it was an edited manuscript in 2004, a paperback in 2007, and finally a hardcover in 2009. At the 2012 Sundance Film Festival, the film premiered. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if it's out. But it's surprising to think that someone might have turned this into a movie because the story is absurd in the best sense of the term. Nothing is what it seems, and the evolution of the supernatural, of the strange, of the bizarre are unpredictable. I always love when stories re-elaborate something that is already out there. But this one not only digests again these stimuli that are already around in the sci-fi fiction, it also puts out something completely new. It's both unsettling and funny and entertaining. It's one of those books you regret finishing. So, I've reached the end of my streak. As usual, I hope I may have given you maybe some suggestions as to what to read next. Tell me what I should read next. There's the contacts down below and all the links you might need. I hope you have survived the overflowing of my words and you'd be willing to give me some of yours. So, till the next time, bye.